Wow. Hey, pura vida, mi gente. How you guys doing? Much love and respect. Thanks for tuning in once again. I really appreciate you guys doing that, taking the time out of your day to come listen to me, come learn a little something, learn together. We're gonna get back into this book. It's called The American Discovery of Europe, which is going to correlate with another chapter of the other book we've been reading, History of America Before Columbus. So I wanted to read this book first. Hope you guys enjoy it. This is written by Jack D. Forbes, great researcher, great scholar here. We've read a lot of his books, including Africans and Native Americans, which a lot of people like to quote. This is one of his other books, again, The American Discovery of Europe. Yeah, The American Discovery of Europe. Yeah, in reverse. They've been teaching us history in reverse. All right, so before I actually start reading today, I just want to say, guys, it may start a little slow. The information, he's going to mention certain things because he has a point that he's going to get to, but it gets really, really good. It gets really interesting. It's going to corroborate a lot of things we've already researched. So just bear with me today in the reading. This might take at least two hours today. It's a little pretty long chapter, so just bear with me, okay? But I promise you, by the end of this chapter, you're going to be informed. There's a lot of drop. There's a lot of babies to pull out, okay? You're going to enjoy it. I guarantee it. And today we're going to go to chapter 4 of this book. And it says here, ancient travelers and migrations. Most people have probably never heard of the idea that ancient Americans might have traveled to other parts of the globe. So strong is the fixation with the newness of America. Mainstream archaeology in the 20th century exhibited hostility toward any ideas that suggest a remote antiquity for humans in the Americas, or to the idea that Americans might have spilled over into Siberia and other parts of Eurasia, okay? Other parts of Eurasia, meaning Europe and Asia, right? So, like he said, mainstream hijack archaeologists, the gatekeepers, they want to say, oh no, America's new world. There was nobody there in ancient times. Everybody came to the Americas. It was uninhabited. The old world's on the other side, but this is the true old world we've been learning, right? During the 19th century, scholars were open to the possibility that humans might have appeared on Earth in extremely ancient times, and that they could therefore have established homes in most parts of the globe, perhaps a million or more years ago. The 20th century, however, witnessed a tendency to restrict the age of modern Homo sapiens and predecessors immediate predecessors to a very brief time span, 100,000 to 200,000 years, and to restrict the history of Native Americans to to from 5,000 to 30,000 or 40,000 years, with a majority of conservative archaeologists favoring an arrival date of some 10,000 to 15,000 years ago. All right. They try to say, that whole Bering Strait theory and that nobody was here before 13,000 years ago. That's a big hijack we've debunked. We got a lot of videos showing human settlement thousands and thousands of years before that, right? Evidence of humans being here. And we know this is the true old world. We know this is the oldest lands and things like that. The result of the newer theoretical orthodoxy has caused a great deal of earlier evidence to be ignored. The recent use of genetics to unravel human history has not changed the orthodoxy, for on the contrary, existing theories of the antiquity of humanoids have served to determine the accepted speed of mutations, changes, which in turn determines the dating of changes in DNA and mtDNA. Thus, genetic evidence is not always able to serve as an independent source of chronology, but instead is partially predetermined by standardized geological and hominid dating. It is not my task here to become embroiled in the controversy surrounding the age of humans, nor to endorse any specific theories of American origins. Instead, theories of American origins, well, he ain't ready to take it there, right? Instead, I hope to present some of the existing theories relating to American movements, and to discuss some general issues relating to human migrations. A few years ago, when I was examining early census records for Nebraska, I was somewhat surprised to note that very few Missourians were arriving in the 1850s and 1860s, and even fewer Southerners. Instead, people were coming into Nebraska from Canada and from the tier of states adjacent to Canada. I soon realized that there was a very good reason for this, that farmers from southern, warmer climates lacked the cultural skills to cope with the Nebraska climate and probably also lacked the psychological preparation for long, cold winters. I then began to think about the large, warm barns to be seen in Germany and Switzerland, with animals and humans often living in the same structure. The animals either on the ground floor or at one end of the solid structure. I thought also of the planning needed to store hay and other food for cows, horses, pigs, and so on, to live off during long, snowy winters, in contrast to that with the often open conditions for animals found in more southern climes, not to mention open houses for humans. My conclusion was that while humans can migrate from a colder to a warmer region, they cannot ordinarily migrate from a warm area to a cold one, except under modern urban industrial conditions, or when coerced, as with enslavement or a desperate need for work, as with farm laborers. I believe that conditions in the northern hemisphere of the earth for many thousands of years have created a very strong likelihood that migrations will ordinarily occur from north to south, except where climate or climatic influence, such as the Gulf Stream and North Atlantic Current, create uniform conditions in south to north region, or they will occur in an east west, one or west to east direction when climate remains much the same. I would argue then that a people adapted to the Arctic and especially to its maritime zones will migrate into similar areas but may find it difficult to push south into the harsher interior. On the other hand, their ability to move south, especially along maritime areas, will be much superior to that of warm climate interior groups moving north, unless perhaps under extreme pressure. If we examine known migration patterns, we can document the movement of such groups as the Celts from north central Germany to Asia Minor, Gaul, and Spain, the Goten or Goths from southern Sweden to east central Europe, and then on to Italy and Spain, the Vandals southward from the near Baltic as far as Spain and North Africa, several Germanic tribes from the Baltic southwards into Switzerland, with incursions into France, Britain, and Italy, Teutonic movements to Britain, the Norse invasions of Scotland, Ireland, France, and Italy, the Danish invasions of Ireland and England, the migrations of the Turks, Tartars, and Mongols southward and southwestward as far as China, India, and Asia Minor, the movements of the Persians and related groups south to Iran, the migrations of Aryan tribes into India from Central Asia, the southward push of the Chinese and the similar migrations of the Thai and Vietnamese peoples, the movement of Swedish Ross Vikings into Russia and on to Constantinople, and on and on. Migrations to the north from warm or temperate regions are far fewer than are usually of a special character. The Romans, for example, did push northward, but they did so in a relatively mild climatic zone, as far as England and somewhat less mild zone in the Balkans. In any case, the Romans utilized native troops whenever possible, including large numbers of Germanic tribesmen and Thracians. They also never seriously penetrated the colder areas of interior Central Europe, that is, beyond the Rhine. The Greeks and the Carthaginians, the Macedonians of Alexander, and most of the old empires never conquered northern regions. Of course, there are exceptions one finds, for example, the Norse moving up the coast of Somaliland to North Cape, but only in a warming period and within the influence of the warm waters of the Gulf Stream North Atlantic Current. Movements can also be east to west and west to east if they follow along a similar climatic zone, as in the German push east into Prussia and the European migrations across North America. It seems to me that this overwhelming pattern of cold to warm, north to south, or same climate movements in recorded human history must be given great weight when we turn to think about ancient human movements. In fact, one can argue that the toolkits, material, and psychosocial carried by our ancient ancestors would be even more crucial in early times because they would tend to be more climate specific than in later evolutionary times, and the ancients would probably tend to lack subcultural variations in diverse environmentally significant specializations within specific communities. In North America, we can document the recorded movements of many nations since European contact. For example, the Blackfeet Confederacy, the Assiniboine, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, the Sutayo, the Crow, Shoshone, Comanche, the Kiowa, the Ojibwe, and Cree all have moved from east to west. In the vicinity of the Black Hills or the Rockies, all the nations that push that far tend to turn southerly, none turn northerly, with the exception of some Cree groups west of Hudson Bay in pursuit of fur-bearing mammals. The Pikunni swing south into Montana. The Kiowa and Comanche push south into Oklahoma and Texas. The Cheyenne, Arapaho, the Sutayo follow the former, and the Plains Apaches are either pushed ahead of all these or join the Kiowa. On the East Coast, we find the Yuchi, Shawnee, and probably Catawbas and Saponis pushing southward, although some Shawnees returned northward to Maryland and Pennsylvania after wars in South Carolina. The Tuscarora and some other remnant groups also moved north to join the Six Nations, but they do so gradually and under severe European pressure. In the Plains area, we find an exception in that it is arguable that Plains Apaches, after acquiring horses, might have pushed northwards to the Black Hills only to begin retreating southwards, as noted above. After their neighbors also acquired horses, and the Apaches were placed under pressure from east as well. This northward movement occurred, however, within the high Buffalo Plain zones, similar in many respects from the West Texas north to southern South Dakota. Many tribes who were driven from the eastern woodlands have notable transitions to new ways of life, abandoning permanent villages, pottery, and agriculture in favor of teepees, leather containers, and major dependence upon buffalo hunting. This transition was, however, greatly facilitated by the acquisition of horses and by the fact that much of their new plains culture was amplified from elements already present in their woodland life. Moreover, as noted, they did not swing north into colder, forested climatic zones, but tended southward, southwestward. When we move back in time, we must, of course, deal with climatic conditions that are quite different from recent centuries. Nonetheless, we must, it seems, assume that human movements in remote antiquity would follow similar rules. For example, movements follow or would follow the Arctic shore or the Imagpic barren shore, circling the upper rim of the globe where feasible, or movements might follow the tundra belt and the edge of the glaciers, or migrations might stay within forested zones of a similar climatic character, and so on. Of course, groups could arguably be forced into new and hostile environments by such phenomena as advancing glaciers or hostile neighbors. However, it is also possible that such groups were not able to survive. Extinction due to starvation and dietary inadequacy are very real possibilities, as can be seen in many Inuit stories of starvation and in the example of the Norse Greenlanders, who were allegedly unable to adapt to a colder environment caused by climatic changes that were favorable to the maritime hunting Inuit people, but perhaps fatal for the Norse. Some scholars have imagined that humans from southern climes have managed to migrate into northern Siberia and from thence into North America, as with early theories of proto Australoids and South Asians migrating from southeastern Asia and eventually leaving descendants in Baja California or South America. and so forth. Now, how about in reverse, right? And they seen in reverse. It seems much more likely that if Asians did cross into North America via Imagpic, they did so after having lived for extremely long periods of time along the Siberian Arctic shore, in the cold interior of the Northeast, or along the shores of Kamchatka and eastern Imagpic. Likewise, when Americans crossed over into Asia, as seems likely, around 10,000 before the present and later, we can be confident that they tended to move within the same climatic bioregions as they had originated, at least for very, very long periods. During periods in which the northern hemisphere was heavily glaciated, much of Alaska and Imagpikia, the Imag Peak seabed exposed by a lowered sea level, would have virtually constituted a separate continent, probably cut off from the balance of America by solid zone of glaciation from the Pacific coast of Canada to the Atlantic. Some have argued for a so called ice free corridor to the east of the Rocky Mountains for a certain period of time toward the close of the last glacial period. However, this is simply a wishful thinking type of theory at this stage of knowledge. In any event, all migration theories must grapple with the difficulty of people moving into more frigid climatic zones or into other demanding bioregions. They must also deal with the fact that population pressures, such as are found in the period of written evidence, would most likely be lacking, and therefore, the motivation for moving from favorable or familiar environments to life threatening ones would be largely absent. Movement then would be extremely slow and probably not unidirectional. We cannot accept any idea of trailblazing groups being pushed ahead all the way from Imagpikia to Patagonia any few generations. Instead, we can expect great confusion and unevenness in the process due to the ability of small groups to constantly filter past one another in a sparsely populated environment, nor can we imagine our American ancestors to have been explorer adventurers with modern desires to discover new lands for the sake of their riches or merely to satisfy curiosity. If they were anything like our recent indigenous ancestors, they would have become firmly attached to its sacred homelands, mountains, and ceremonial sites that they would be extremely loath to abandon. The theory has been sometimes put forth that ancient humans, or some of them, were avid big game hunters and that they followed migration herds of animals in an endless trek across vast regions, as in crossing Imagpikia. This is, of course, unlikely for two reasons. First, because herd animals tend to migrate within a fixed area, thus allowing hunters to also remain within that area. And second, because without very effective spear points or projectiles and cutting tools, people are not likely to be hunters of large game. Thus, the people who crossed Imagpikia were not following herds of animals, judging from the absence of suitable projectile points in pre 13,000 before the present times. If we accept the conservative archaeologists' rejection of the Louisville, Texas sites, listen to this, 37,000 to 33,000 before the present. All right, these are real sites. That's in Texas. Date for a Clovis type point. Even if the latter is accepted, it still leaves the northeast Siberia Imagpikia region bereft of early points. It is worth mentioning here that long before modern sapiens appeared east of the Sinai, other types of humans, such as European man, Homo neanderthal, had long been living in cold climates in Europe, while various types of Homo erectus were distributed over southern parts of Eurasia and well up into China. Presumably, these physically robust types had long adjusted to frigid climates and doubtless paved the way for entry into the farther north as glaciers retreated in the several interglacial periods. But their relationship to the origins of Americans or most Asians is totally unclear. Did modern sapiens evolve from them outside of Africa? Did they intermix with modern humans? Did they teach sapiens to cope with specialized environments not found in Africa or Western Asia? Interestingly, a recent find in the Republic of Georgia places perhaps three types of humans in the same site, apparently living in the same area. Did European man, Neanderthal, or Homo erectus ever reach America? For whatever it is worth, a number of American nations do have traditions of being preceded by or fighting with giants or more robust people. The bones of giants were allegedly found on occasion, but no scientific investigation seemed to have verified such. In any case, I want to now briefly review some of the ideas about the antiquity of humans in Abya Yala, one native name for America. Abya Yala. This is a very controversial subject, and we can begin by stating categorically that no one knows the answer. Early sites have been systematically rejected by conservative archaeologists following the lead of the notorious Ales Hidrikla, a Czech physical anthropologist who came to dominate Euro-American studies of American antiquity early in the 20th century. Right? This is the guy credited with inventing the whole Bering Strait theory. All right, he's a hijack, guys. Nonetheless, we must keep an open mind, since many of the ancient sites were sometimes found under conditions similar to famous sites in Eurasia that are fully accepted by the majority of scholars, such as the finds that gave us Java Man, Peking Man, Hindenburg Monk, and so on. So, real quick, Java Man, that's been proven to be a hoax. They created Java Man. Can you guys believe that? Older archaeological evidence based on geological dating could place Homo sapiens in the Americas as early as 1 to 3 million years ago. More recent evidence, such as that of the Hueyotlalco, Mexico, could take modern humans back 250,000 years ago. And I talked about this yesterday at the end of my video. I showed you, I got a video on this site. This site was buried, it was found in layers that seem to be as old as 250,000 years old, guys. We're talking about human settlements. We're talking about they found a bone of an animal with a drawing of an elephant. Yeah, they inscribed an elephant on the bone. You know that's not natural. And they found it in these old geological stratas, that are at least 250,000 years old, according to their science. Unfortunately, however, such early dates conflict sharply with the opinion of contemporary biohistorians who believe that modern humans first appeared in Africa about 200,000 before the present. Dodge the hijack, talking about their whole evolution and Darwinism, and did not begin to migrate out until about 100,000 before the present, appearing first principally in North Africa and Western Asia. So you see why. Do you guys understand why they try to say all these things are fraudulent? Because they're trying to say that Homo sapiens didn't leave Africa until 100,000 years ago. So if they find an Homo sapien evidence anywhere else in the world, not just in the Americas, they'll say, nope, this got to be fake. It doesn't fit our Darwinism, our evolutionary theory. According to this notion, it took about 100,000 years for modern sapiens to reach the near area of Western Asia, but then only 50 to 80,000 years to migrate all the way to America, adapting to arid environments, cold but temperate mountain environments, cold treeless steppes of Central Asia, even colder mountains of Mongolia or forests of Siberia, frigid treeless zones of northern Siberia, and mountainous, partially glaciated regions of northeast Siberia or Arctic coastal environments. So I understand why he was talking about people migrating to warmer places. It's unlikely that people would migrate up or to colder places. And that's what they try to tell us about this whole Bering Strait theory, that they went from warm climates, right, coming out of Africa, and then they went up these cold places and then over into Alaska from Russia and Mongolia and then down again. So I understand why he was bringing that point up. Alternatively, humans might have crossed through warm and tropical South Asia and Southeast Asia, entering China, and then gradually migrating northward into ever more frigid and more arid environments until reaching eastern Siberia. Needless to state, the number of radical adjustments would be extremely great, especially with the route via India, Burma, and China. So These are the things people don't think about, right? Aside from the problem of having southerners migrate against the weather to colder climates, many of the theories of ancient migration assume a certain plasticity of culture, namely that desert nomads could become mountain dwellers, then learn tropical forest culture, go on to the colder and drier climates farther north, or become coastal maritime people, and so on. All right. See all the hijacks they don't explain? How did all these people adapt to all these things on their migration, right? But we need to have better evidence about how inland hunters become fisher folk, or how fisher folk make the change to hunting, or how people adjust to a steppe environment after being in forest, or vice versa. How many biohistorians and archaeologists have studied in detail such transitions? They haven't. That's why he's asking that. Do we have examples of coastal maritime people shifting to inland ways of life? Or of inland people mastering a marine technology without borrowing a toolkit from already existing seafolk? The question of why Homo sapiens would leave temperate climates to move into frigid Siberia has never been answered. They haven't answered or even asked the question. The old fashioned theory was that small groups of hunters followed herd animals, generation after generation, finally crossing the Imak Peak or Barren Sea, when it was open tundra. Right? They did it because they were following animals, but when you understand that most of these animals originated in America and a lot of them went into Asia, it's backwards. It's not really going with the science. But does this view make any sense when one looks at northeastern Siberia and notices all of the transverse mountain ranges that, coupled with the harsh environment, would not have made for ideal range for herd animals? You guys understand that? What would animals be doing there? Whether Mueller has argued that Siberia, from the Urals to the Kolyma River, is actually culturally unrelated to America, and that it constitutes a barrier, with cultures explaining or expanding northerly along south to north rivers, but not east to west. He also, following others, sees that Chukchi and other northeastern Siberian peoples as being essentially Americanoid. Look at that. And reversed is what I've been telling you. And perhaps the result of migration backflow from America. From America. In any event, it would seem much more likely that human beings would have followed the coast, being adapted to a semi maritime way of life, whether along the north coast of Siberia or the coast of Kamchatka and the North Pacific. The edge of the landbridge, if it existed, would not have been particularly attractive to maritime cultures. I would think, since sea life is perhaps most abundant along rocky shores rather than along alluvial fans and mudflats. Nonetheless, bird life and such would perhaps have made up for the lack of seaweed and other foods found along rocky shores. European scholars seem to be uniformly convinced of the existence of the Imakpikia land bridge during the late Pleistocene. All right. Now remember this Pleistocene man in America. We're talking about the Calavera stone. I am not so sure of its existence or width for a variety of reasons, which I will only cite briefly. What happened to the currents that flow through the Imakpik from the Arctic Ocean to the North Pacific? Would that current have been so weak that it could not maintain a channel to the Pacific, cutting through the silt continuously? And what did the whales do who normally migrate against the cold current to the Arctic? 2. Has anyone calculated the annual silt deposit by the Yukon and other rivers and subtracted the silt that has been deposited for 10,000 years now from the depth of the Imakpik? 3. Has anyone calculated the effect of North America moving west over the Pacific plate on the increased elevation of the Imakpik region since 10,000 before the present? 4. Why did a number of animals not cross the bridge, such as the Siberian horse, the Northeast Asian tiger, the American bison, the American wolf, and a number of other species? Those are good questions, right? Surely, if humans could reach Imakpik, the tough Siberian ponies could have crossed as well, one would think. That's a good question. They don't answer none of this. We just listen and believe, right? We don't even ask questions. In any case, migrants to and from America did not require a land bridge if they were maritime oriented and were capable of using rafts, dugouts, or other floating devices. All right. So again, migrants to or from America, and they were maritime people. We know that. So yeah, why would they be crossing that cold place? They would just use a boat or a ship, to cross the ocean. I believe that the latter was the case, or the latter was the case, for two reasons. First, the evidence from Australia that humans were able to cross from island to island, reaching Australia by 60,000 to 40,000 before the present. Second, that Americans were apparently able to reach Iceland by about 9,000 before the present, to be discussed later. Most Native Americans in North America believe that they were created in America, but there are also traditions suggesting migrations across the Pacific. The Hopi and and some South Americans, while some Guarani speakers are recorded as looking to the east, to Africa perhaps, as a place of origin. That's the hijack. It is interesting that trans-Pacific origins would point towards very, very early navigational skills. It would certainly suggest coastal migrations upon arrival in America. Some scholars are suggesting that most of ancient American skeletons, which are very few, resemble South Asians rather than later Northeast Asians. Such terms as South Asian are, of course, very general, and one has to ask, does this term refer to the very rare Asian skeletons in Southern Asia, 50,000 to 10,000 before the present? Let us say, or to the modern peoples of Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Malaysia, and so on, among whom there are great physical variations from Negrito, and they're calling them African. This is Dodge the hijack, right? To mixed features including African elements and various Asian elements related to East Asia, as well as to the Indian subcontinent, along with immigrants from South China. Now, that was a good paragraph right here. I want to break this down, right, for a lot of you who are new, and maybe you guys forgot that have been following me for a while. Remember what Southeast Asians look like, the original. And he just said it, Negritos, right? Negritos, he's calling them Africans, but like, for example, the Andaman Islanders, they have their haplogroup uh, are Asian. They're not from Africa. People cannot prove these people came out of Africa just because they're so-called black or Negritos. So he's saying, what did he say here? He's saying some scholars are suggesting that most ancient American skeletons, which are very few, resemble South Asians rather than later Northeast Asians, right? Remember what Graham was saying, there's some connection with the Southeast Asians and ancient South Americans. We can agree to that. I'm telling you, they came out of here, a lot of them. In any event, a trans-Pacific route would seem to be ruled out by the late dates for settlement in Polynesia. And various kinds of Asians reached America by maritime means. If various kinds of Asians reached Americans by maritime means, and again, they're seen in reverse, they must have utilized the Japan current and not any trans-Pacific routes. In that case, it would probably be incorrect to term them South Asians. Physical variations among ancient Americans should not surprise us at all. The current interest is the subject, and the subject may spring from a conscious or subconscious desire to make the claim that other peoples were the true first Americans, and that Indians were later arrivals. That's the hijack. Again, all these authors are always seen in reverse. They're always going with that theory that America was uninhabited, that this isn't the ancient world. They're not even thinking like that. How we're thinking, like, or we know, now in 2024. This is an old book, all right? This is not a modern book. This is, I believe, from the 90s or early 2000s, that when he wrote this. So he's still kind of a little bit of the hijack out of Asia or out of Africa theories, right? Calling people in the Southeast African. That's a big misconception, right? all skinfolk ain't kinfolk, even with the Southeast Asians. That doesn't mean because they're so-called black or Negro looking that they came out of Africa. All right. This effort to discredit Indians surged with the controversy over Kennewick Man, an individual portrayed initially as a European and later as perhaps some type of Asian, in spite of Kennewick's obvious resemblance to later Native American individuals of a long-headed variety, including, as I pointed out, a Nez Perce leader from the same region. In the early 1960s, I wrote, so listen to when he's really writing these things. This is pretty old writings, is what I'm saying. All right. He said, now remember, there's all types of so called phenotypes here in ancient America. So when they find somebody that resembles a European, and just because they think that all Indians looked one way, oh, it must be a European. Or like when they find the Olmec statues, right? They say, oh, that must be an African that came here. No, we had all those looks here in ancient America. But either way, let's see what he wrote in 1960s. It should be borne in mind that the Native Americans were themselves the result of ancient inter-ethnic relations, that they were not of a uniform group when the Europeans arrived. These groups also had distinctive physical characteristics. That's what I was just saying. They didn't all look the same. There was, for example, very little similarity between a heavily bearded, round-faced Central Californian native and a lightly bearded, sharp-featured plains dweller. Variations in color, again, in color, facial type, phenotype, right? Beardedness, height, body, and build, and other features were very pronounced, especially in certain regions, and changes could be observed within short distances, right? And even near each other. There was different nations, different looking peoples, all right, in America. Thus, the Native Americans themselves may represent a process of amalgamation of diverse stocks, which was not yet complete at the time of European contact. On the other hand, they may originally have been relatively uniform, people who formed separate groups through the process of isolation, genetic drift, and differential re-amalgamation. I have been teaching for over 40 years, all right, Jack Forbes, right? And he continues saying, the physical characteristics of Native American peoples were at one time thought to link them with the so-called Mongoloid peoples of Asia. But the problem is now generally seen to be much more complex than was formerly supposed. For one thing, the American Indian peoples did not comprise a physically uniform population, all right? They didn't look all the same. You can't say they were all Mongoloid, all right? And that's a bad word to use either way. Although the variations in physical type found in the Americas are not as great as those found in Eurasia or Africa, well, not according to him, but according to other authors, they were as diverse as Eurasia and Africa. We got the sources already, right? We've read the books. They nonetheless are great enough to suggest that perhaps several different ancestral groups mixed either before or after migration to this hemisphere. And again, gosh, the hijack. Again, this he's still going with a little bit of hijack saying that this place was uninhabited. So, you know, in any event, it would be a mistake to think that Native Americans, as part of a Mongoloid racial family, since several or more important characteristics of the so-called classic Mongoloid type are virtually absent along American Indians, such as B and AB blood types and the epicanthic I-fold. This writer would suggest that Native Americans, by and large, comprise a population standing somewhat between the extreme Caucasoid and Mongoloid types, and many represent either the end product of the mixture of several Mongoloid and Caucasoid type groups or the survival of the type from which Mongoloid and Caucasoid are both derived. Listen, now that one, all right, he's saying they might actually, these Mongoloids and so-called Caucasoids, so-called Mongoloids, might derive from actual Americans. They might be the remnants of that. The reader should, however, be aware that such terms as Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid, etc., are almost completely discredited as referring to races, all right? And that's what we're saying. This whole classification of races that way, that's so wrong to look at people that way. It's so false. That was created by Germans and other people in 1800s and stuff. That's a wrong way to view nations of the world. So he's saying, you can't be referring to races like that or groups of people who are genetically distinct. And so he says, see my book, Afro Americans in the Far West, 1967, for a discussion of the concept of race, right? So again, these books he's written that we're reading even now is probably that old. Nonetheless, we find that some archaeologists continue to use antiquated terminology, apparently being unfamiliar with modern genetics and with the variations found both in Eurasia and America. All right, diversity. So he's also doing the same thing. He's being he's kind of antiquated with that whole America's New World. One becomes a bit irritated when one finds, for example, one writer attempting to contrast Paleo Indians with the supposed non Indians, first Americans, who allegedly preceded them. Yeah, that's a way of hijack to see it. What do you mean? What do you mean they're not the modern Indians? You're saying ancient Indians or the first Americans are not the Indians, because the way they tell us Indians look like we're supposed to be. That's why they're comparing it with only a person that supposedly looks Mongoloid, right? The modern Native Americans or American Indians, whatever term we use, are certainly descended from all the groups who entered America. See, he's saying entered. He's not saying they were natives here or indigenous or aborigines from this land. So we got to dodge the hijack on that. So he's still saying, though, they have to be descended from those first groups. And all of these ancestors are Indians, if any of them are Indians. But of course, Indian belongs to India, and any true Paleo Indians would be living in or near India, not America. Dash the hijack. So here he goes, talking about antiquarian thoughts. I just want to tell you guys, remember, this is India superior. The country India today was not named until like 1947. It was called Hindustan. And before that, Bharat, Turan, Bharat, it wasn't called India. America has maps older that have India on them already. Before India, the country was named India. So imagine, think about that. The truth is that all races are essentially geographical groupings. Thus, when we speak of an American race, we are simply referring to all persons who have intermixed in America from the beginning of human settlement for the next 15 to 50,000 or more years until 1492. Again, dodge the hijack. People's been here since creation. These are the oldest lands. People came out of here. America's the true old world. And this author, during the time he wrote this book, didn't know that. He wasn't thinking like that. He was still a little biased with that whole out of Asia or out of Africa theory. The American race is not a genetically separate population from other geographical populations such as Asians, Pacific Islanders, or perhaps even Europeans, but they are separate. But it is a race. Race means a branch, not a separate, distinct group that has obviously absorbed or evolved many variations in appearances as well as ways of life. These variations are such that anyone familiar with living Native American peoples has to be a lot more careful about saying that a given skull without hair and flesh does not look Indian. All right, good point there. Or does not look like a Nevada Indian, or does not look like a Pacific Northwest Indian, and so on. The reconstructed heads that I have seen look like people I have known. And we must remember that diet and weight will change the way a person looks. Just look at a modern, tall Japanese American man walking next to his short, delicate mother or grandmother. Certain Euro American scholars have advanced the idea that similarities seen by some in North American cultures are compared with European cultures, especially in stone point technology, suggests a migration route from Europe to North America in Pleistocene times. Again, gosh, the hijack, seeing it in reverse. Man, this theory is based primarily, again, this theory, he just may said it's a theory, I don't know, is based primarily upon the supposed similarity between the Solutrean points of Spain and southern France, dated 24,000 and 16,000 before the present, and the Clovis points of North America, dated usually at 11,200 to 10,800 before the present, according to their carbon dating. In the early 37,000 to 33,000 before the present date of the Louisville site is ignored, right? The one in Texas, they ignore that one, right? Is a lot older, and we got older sites here, of course. Even now we're learning. The idea advanced by E. F. Greenman in 1963 and repeated more recently by others is that Europeans traveled by raft or boat from Western Europe to North America along the edge of glaciated and frozen ice in the North Atlantic. Again, seen in reverse. Remember, in this same book, he said, and he quoted the historian, the navigational expert, that if anybody crossed the Atlantic, first it would have been American Indians because of the strong sea currents going that way and the winds that are favorable, not the other way around. It's 4 times harder. All right, there's a whole chapter on this book about that. Such a theory goes against all knowledge of currents. Look, he's about to mention it. And winds in the Atlantic, as already discussed. And actually defies common sense as well. You don't have common sense when you're saying people came here. Why would big game hunting people using Solutrean points decide to become maritime folk, setting out in unknown seas against winds and currents with a totally foreign ice-edged environment to confront? It would make more sense to have Iberians drift southerly to the Canary Islands and Morocco than cross after centuries perhaps to Trinidad and the Caribbean. But then we would find the Solutrean in the African islands and Morocco, and it would show up in the Caribbean earlier than in mainland North America. It would also make much more sense to see the occasional similarities between America and Europe as being due to shared cultural needs or common psychic evolution or physic evolution, or to Americans actually carrying innovations to Europe. And that's the one they always leave last, right? He just left that last, but that's the one we've been trying to say. We've been seeing it in reverse. As noted earlier, it is incredibly easier for Americans to reach Europe. Again, it's much easier for Americans to reach Europe, while it is virtually impossible for Europeans to reach America, except from off north of Africa, before the advent of sails and techniques of tacking against the wind. Okay? You guys are hearing? When you have common sense, you would know this when you study and research navigational history and the currents of the world and where the winds are, navigation. You would know this. As noted earlier, the North Atlantic was probably very dangerous in Pleistocene glaciation periods, with strong westerly winds and currents clashing directly with sea ice and permanent ice. A great deal of turbulence could be expected, where westerly driven waves crashed against ice cliffs or huge bergs. The experience of Inuits along the east shore of Greenland illustrates that sea ice does not always calm wind-driven seas. For east to west travel, the situation would be nearly impossible from Europe because the occasional easterly winds found at high latitudes would be blowing over frozen ice, not over open sea in all likelihood. Still further, the route from Iberia north to France and Britain would have been extremely difficult because of prevailing northerly summer winds that make the job of reaching northern destinations quite difficult. All right, listen, real research. The crossing of the Bay of Biscay could be extremely dangerous, as noted earlier. More recently, some proponents of the Solutrean theory have considered a southern route from off southern Spain or North Africa. But again, why not find the Solutrean in Africa, Madeira, the Canaries, or Azores in that case? There's no evidence. And a landfall in America would still be in the Bahamas or the Caribbean, not on the east coast of North America. How they've been saying, right? Oh, they came, they found it Newburgh, Newfoundland, and all New England, but they were seeing it in reverse. We were going that way. It's much easier. Certainly, no early European big game hunters would end up in the Powhatan James River in Virginia. If they did make a landfall in the Bahamas or Caribbean, by the time they or their descendants would have migrated to Virginia, their toolkit would have certainly changed greatly in a small tool maritime direction. In any event, in our discussion of American visits to Europe, we shall be considering all Americans of pre-1492 as being equally Americans, okay? Just talking about ancient Americans, not anybody else, whether long-headed or broad-headed, robust or delicate, tall or short, with high cheekbones or not, we're all the same diverse variety we witness among unmixed Native Americans of modern times. In the 19th century and earlier, there was a ready reception for the idea that pre Colombian Americans had become travelers to distant continents. Listen to this. This is what the books we're reading. He just said it. And these books from the 1800s, the 19th century, and earlier, we're talking about primary sources, they already had accepted the idea that pre-Columbian Americans had become travelers to distant continents. We're going to read a chapter tomorrow, most likely, in that book, The History of America Before Columbus, stating what he's literally saying right now. Okay? While others argue that Americans had helped to civilize the Egyptians, Indians, Japanese, all right? Listen, America's the true old world. Others argued, right? Others were telling us in these old books, they were letting us know that we went out from here. And what? Civilized Egyptians, so-called Egyptians, Indians, talking about Hindustan, Japanese. Who's the ancient Nagas, right? India, Hindustan. Who's the ancient Nagas? And others by spreading the learning of the Mayas and other American nations, right? The Mayas. Who's the Nagas? Come on now. What is what Buddha's first name? Guatemala. Guatemala. Who's his mom? Maya. Literally. Come on now. The Argentine scholar Florentino Ameghino proposed that South America was the origin place of modern humans after finding Homo sapiens skulls and geological formations reputed to be more than 1 million years old, okay? And we got to get that book, all right? America, India. We got to get that. And Michael Kreml wrote about it, Forbidding Archaeology. I think we have read this already. I know I've read a little bit of Forbidding Archaeology, Michael Kreml's book, all right, if you guys don't know. That's a good source right there, right? You guys hear what he was saying, right? That guy? That, what? Civilization or humans, Homo sapiens, South America was the original place, you know, coinciding with we're reading in the other book too, Researches into the Lost History of America. Come on now. America's the true old world, oldest land, you know, mammals and agriculture and all that. Other early scholars repeated the stories about Atlantis, derived from Plato and Theopompe, and later writings of Posidonius, to the effect that people from the West had invaded and conquered either parts of the Mediterranean or the Celtic regions of Europe farther north, all right? Told you guys, man. These accounts were then linked up with the supposed origin of the Iberian peoples in the West, so that the Iberians were seen as descendants of the Atlanteans or Americans, all right? We've been saying this, guys. We've been saying this. Proof was then found in the language and character of the Basque. Now listen to this. As the last speakers of an Iberian tongue, whose resemblance to Americans was strongly believed, Basque was in fact stated to be an American language. Man, that's a big one right there. We got future videos on the Basque. You see what he's saying? Remember this. And I've been saying the Basque most likely came from the Americas. A lot of these ancient people of Europe. And, you know, the Basques were pre-Roman, one of the oldest peoples there in a lot of parts of Europe, right? And they even had a Basque Algonquin pidgin language. They could talk to each other. Man. So the Basque was in fact stated to be an American language. All right? An American language. Let's look at that source. The Ardois de Jubain, les premiers habitants. All right. A lot of these are literally written in French. But look what we have here. Deroux. This is the book we're reading, The History of America Before Columbus, History of America. All right, Deroux, that's the same book he just quoted, guys. We've been reading that book. Look at that corroboration. It is possible that these traditions reflect the actual arrival of Americans in Europe. Is it possible? Come on now, of course it is. If anybody crossed the Atlantic first, it would have been American Indians. This is the true old world, the oldest land that came out of the primordial waters. Come on now. Do they perhaps reflect ancient Iberic traditions later acquired by the Greeks or by the Egyptians, so-called Egyptians? Egyptians, the real ancient Egypt was here in America. In any case, theories of Eskimo, Inuit migrations to Europe also developed, based in part upon skull shapes, but also on the resemblances seen between European Mesolithic cultures and those of Arctic peoples. In more recent times, such theories have been revived by scholars including Werner Muller and Jeffrey Goodman. The latter takes much the same data used by E.F. Greenman and others, who argue for a Solutrean movement from Spain to America, to argue that radiocarbon dates favor the exact opposite, that the movement was from America to Europe via Siberia, huh? Via Siberia. Goodman suggests that there were probably several migrations from North America to Europe and back again and back. This is what I was saying. When these so-called Vikings and Celtics were coming, they were just coming back. Several migrations from North America to Europe, okay? He cites the strong evidence of North American backflow into Siberia about 10,000 before the present to help build his case. He cites Gordon Willey to the effect that American invented blade and point forms diffused from North America to Asia. All right? They've been seen in reverse this whole time in the early post-Pleistocene. Points of American type also appear in Lake Baikal at 8,000 before the present. All right? American Genesis. All right? Another book we are going to get into, guys. All right? From Goodman. But Goodman also argues that Americans crossed over to Asia at much earlier times, sending Homo sapiens into Asia and Europe, he states. I believe that Paleo-Indians from the New World, the first fully modern man anywhere in the world, listen, the first fully modern man anywhere in the world traveled to the Old World and woke it from its sound evolutionary sleep. So why are you calling it New World and Old World over there? If you're saying these are the oldest Homo sapiens, fully modern men, right? Corroborating with the Calavera skull, the Guadalupe woman, and everything else we found here. Even the ancient site in California, remember Graham Hancock saying 130,000 years old. Come on now. And what did they do when they went over there? They woke it from its sound evolutionary sleep. The path of migration from North America to Siberia, Asia, and then Europe, this movement occurred perhaps in warm interglacial, about 170,000 to 70,000 before the present, or in another relatively warm time, about 35,000 to 27,000 before the present. In 1989, Werner Muller published a book devoted entirely to a similar thesis, except that he regards central Siberia, from the Urals to the Kolyma River, as a gap or barrier, separating similar American and European ancient cultures of the Paleolithic and Mesolithic. Thus, Muller favors the movement of Homo sapiens of American origin. Listen, we're not talking about monkey bones or ape men, from North America directly to Europe via the Greenland, Iceland, Spitsbergen zone. All right, Homo sapiens, modern human type. Like Goodman, he sees Proto-Europeans living in the American Arctic, but he identifies them with the Tornet, a people supposedly preceding the Thule Inuit, all right, preceding these Inuit across northern and eastern Canada. Mueller is able to compile an impressive amount of evidence to argue for an American derivation, all right? American derivation for post 40,000 before the present Europeans, all right? They came from America. These Europeans that were there before 40,000 years ago. Listen, evidence centered around the Siberian gap already mentioned, a number of cultural resemblances, and most especially an Arctic origin for the first post-Neanderthal European cultures. You know, I don't know if he's going to get into it, but now we're kind of learning. People are starting to say, you know, Cro-Magnon was really American Indians that went over there to Europe. Now you had this whole new species of human, right? Meeting the so-called Neanderthal. They're saying those were American Indians, red skin, copper colored American Indians, Cro-Magnon. All right. So kind of matching what they're saying here. Mueller argues that Americans could have followed the same route to Europe as did the Pleistocene Rangifer Arcticus reindeer. a species found in North America, and then again anciently in Northwest Europe, the two areas being separated from each other over most of Eurasia by Rangifer tarandus, a different variety. A land connection in the early Quaternary in the most northerly regions is cited, as well as vague references to later possibilities. Mueller states that the American continent was not the recipient, but the initiator. All right, again, they've been seeing it in reverse this whole time. This is what I was trying to say. They're not, they didn't get their knowledge from people coming here and receiving it, recipients. They're the initiators. They're the people who civilized, who brought all that knowledge, who came out from here. Initiators, right? We're the initiators, not the recipients. As things now stand, the American continent passed on its development to Asia. We passed our development to Asia in the West as well. All right. All those, you know, temples they're building in Southeast Asia and everywhere, they're resembling Maya. Come on, this is what we're saying, guys. Been saying it for the longest time. How many books are stating the same thing? How much research was already out there that they didn't tell us about? They had us reading all these other books in school or not even anything at all. The American continent passed on its development to Asia in the West, okay? The Calavera skull is cited. The Calavera skull, man. What have we been saying? They found a modern human fossil, modern type human fossil that is not a forgery. It's a real fossilized Homo sapien they found in California. Pleistocene man. Yeah, Pleistocene man in America. I got a whole video on that. Check it out. Only a re-examination of the discoveries from the last century could definitely establish the presence of man in the New World during the early Quaternary. Then it will become apparent that America is the only typically sapiens continent. Come on, man. This is deep. Body bag for the illusion. Yo, shout out to Con Drop, yo. Come on now. America is the only typically sapiens continent where modern humans types are. This is the only continent, right? He's saying that it had typically sapiens. Come on now. Not ape man. We ain't talking about ape man, boss. Yo, shout out to Drop. Of course, the theories of Mueller, Goodman, and earlier advocates of American origin for modern humans fall completely outside of the conceptual framework of most contemporary North American archaeologists or European North American paleontologists, all right? So this is the gatekeepers. No, we get funded by the Chazars. They like, if we say that, they're gonna fire us and stop funding us. So the gatekeepers, they don't want to go with those so-called theories of Mueller. It's not just theories, guys. We've proven it in so many different ways. America's the true old world. They are, in short, not even considered. They don't even consider these possibilities. They don't even teach us about this stuff. For my part, I believe that we must keep an open mind on all these questions, since the accepted theories of today may well be the repudiated theories of tomorrow. There you go. And I mean, I give him props for that, Mr. Jack Forbes. I give you props if you're still alive, listening. I don't know if he is. I think he passed away. I'm not exactly sure. I might be wrong. But, what you were saying earlier is a theory. We already know this is the true old world. And soon this will be mainstream, guys. Soon people will know America's the true old world. There's too much evidence coming out. More people are going to do research. It's going to come out as the truth. For example, the predominant idea of today that modern sapiens came out of Africa about 100,000 before the present is contradicted by Chinese findings of sapiens remains allegedly dated to 300,000 and 400,000 before the present, as well as by the theories that modern humans evolved from Homo erectus like ancestors all over the globe, all over, not just out of Africa. All right, not from ape men, especially now. See, he's still talking about evolving. See, so you got to dodge the hijack. He still kind of believes in evolution, and that's one of those theories that will be repudiated tomorrow. That's a great example right there of this author still holding on to. You got to be talking about yourself. Even though he has an open mind, he ain't ready to fully let go at the time if he wrote this book, right? We ain't coming out of no apes or evolving. Where's the missing link? Come on, man. They still haven't found it. I believe that Goodman's theory of American migrations to Europe via Siberia faces tremendous physical obstacles in terms of Siberian realities, while Mueller's idea of North Atlantic route must await evidence relating to ancient navigation. One certainly cannot visualize any crossing of the North Atlantic by dog sled, even if one could show the sleds and dogs were available. However, as I hope to show, there is a great deal of evidence to show that Americans did reach Iceland and Europe at later dates, after 10,000 before the present, by means of watercraft. But that date is too late, of course, to explain European cultural and physical evolution after 40,000 before the present. So, you ain't going further back. We've been navigating thousands of years before. I mean, we read, what is it, Atlantis in America? He was saying there was navigation going back to at least 40 to 50,000 years before the present. You got to do better research, Jack. Nonetheless, any significant genetic interchanges between America and Europe, or America and Asia, or America and Polynesia after 10,000 before the present will still be of great importance. In this connection, studies of mtDNA, the genetic material passed from mother to distant descendants only in the female line, have located a rare type called haplogroup X, which is found apparently only among a small percentage of Native Americans in both North and South America. The significant thing about X is that it appeared before European exploration and is also found rarely in Europe and Asia. The source area for the X lineage is not clear, but already its existence is being taken to support theories of ancient European visits to America. All right, again, seen in reverse. On the other hand, I would argue that it could better support theories of ancient American visits to Europe. All right, yeah. Knowing everything else, we know all the other research, all the proof, the food, the resources, the oldest land. Come on now. You got to be logical. So this, is most likely happening because they came out of ancient American visits to Europe and the Mediterranean, like Plato was saying, so-called Atlanteans. Today, of course, the use of genetic data to shed light upon historical problems has become widespread. The data available to biohistorians, as I call them, have changed radically in the last 50 or so years, with many new and complex tools of analysis is now available. Unfortunately, most geneticists and biohistorians are usually poorly trained in ethnohistorical methodology and know very little about the documented movements and mixtures of human beings during recorded history. Many thousands, if not millions, of Americans were enslaved. Listen to this. Listen to this. Pay attention. Wake up if you fell asleep. Wake up. Many thousands, if not millions. And Jack Forbes has shown a lot of good evidence. We've read his other book, Africans and Native Americans, showing what the enslavement of American Indians. He's saying many thousands, if not millions, of Americans were enslaved after 1492. Listen, and their bondage often included being shipped to Africa. All right, into Africa, not out of the Canary Islands, Portugal and Spain and elsewhere. All right, Americans by what? The thousands or millions. Millions. Is that why when they take DNA tests, you might be showing relations, some percentage of people in West Africa, North Africa, Iberian Peninsula, and elsewhere? Millions of Americans were enslaved when Columbus and his boys, Sephardic Jews and all the Moors came, the Catholics and all these other people. One would expect, therefore, to find a certain number of persons living today in the Mediterranean, Iberian Peninsula, and African coastal regions, West Africa, right, who could well possess American mtDNA or American Y chromosome characteristics, all right, as well as blood types and other markers. And this is what they're going off. They're cheating when they're giving you these DNA test results. They ain't explaining all the ancient travel and all the enslavement of American Indians brought over there. They don't tell you all that. And then they put the percentages really high. Oh, yeah, you must be from this person, and really low. in America, right? They got this all set up. It's all a trick, guys. Confusion could be added by the fact that many of the Americans were derived from areas in Brazil and the Caribbean, where few, if any, unmixed Native Americans now live. Hmm. Thus, they could pass on to Europeans genetics markers that would not be known to geneticists studying contemporary indigenous Americans. Oof, that's a big one right there. Who are they using as the source? He just said it. Who are they using as the source? You ain't using the real people as the source when they're taking these DNA tests or they giving you the results. Man, guys, listen, right? You guys heard that, right? Huge numbers of Taino, Arawaks, Caribs, and other peoples from many regions, especially along the east coast of America, from Newfoundland, and then from Massachusetts, New Hampshire, over to Argentina. Come on, man, from New England over to Argentina have disappeared in the sense of unmixed populations. Mad Indians, guys, were being sent to other parts of the Americas, and then they're saying, oh, well, these were Africans they brought. That's a lie. That's a lie. A lot of these so-called Africans were other Indians being shifted around the Americas. A lot of them went to Europe and then were brought back. They came back as so-called Africans or Negroes. We've read this. We've shown the primary sources. That's a big one right there too. Survivors may have African and European ancestry and probably have been partially or largely ignored by genetic researchers. May have. Now he's saying African, but he's saying dark complexion. Because he's saying they might have mixed with the Negroes. They were Negro. That's the way you're not understanding, Jack Forbes. But until the genetic characteristics of all these missing Americans, you still hear these missing Americans are reconstructed, we cannot be sure about the kind of biological heritage possessed in 1492 by America's nations. Thus, current generalizations, all right? Generalizations, people, everybody generalizes now, often seem extremely premature. And this includes one from the study of American teeth, skulls, and languages as well. Since all cases, many examples have disappeared. The impact of diseases introduced by Europeans from 900 CE of the current period or era onward, and especially after 1492, also needs to be considered. Such diseases as smallpox, malaria, bubonic plague, syphilis, and so on may have had the effect of eliminating certain populations or selecting for certain genetic characteristics. That's a big one right there too. This might especially be the case where large populations have disappeared. All right, disappeared, but you're still here, as in the Dorset area of eastern Canada about 1000 AD, or in malarial zones of tropical America. Oh, they must have disappeared. No, you're still here. You got reclassified as so-called Africans, slaves. The subject of Native American migrations to or contacts with Europe ultimately depends upon when Americans acquired the navigational skills necessary to cross the Atlantic, either totally by sea or partially on land. Greenland, Iceland, and ice islands. The fact that persons seem to have reached Australia by 50 to 60,000 before the present, or that Homo erectus might have crossed stretches of water even earlier, do not necessarily establish the Americans possessed such skills in Pleistocene times before 11,000 before the present. An early site on Santa Rosa Island, California, dated at around 35,000 before the present, could indicate early navigation on the west coast, and certainly artifacts on nearby San Miguel Island, dated at 13,000 before the present, would seem to prove the same. Farther north, boats seem definitely to have been used for the early settlement of Uncmac Island in the Aleutians or Aleutians, dated 8,400 before the present, unreachable by land. Actually, initial settlement could have been even earlier, since the shoreline for earlier millennia was under water after 8,000 before the present, and thus sites older than that are simply not available for examination. On the east coast of North America, a site at Miami indicates that Americans were eating reef fish caught from seaworthy vessels by 9,000 before the present. People were going out into the sea fishing with ships, seaworthy vessels, 10,000 years ago. And there's proof in Miami. At about the same time, Americans were possibly reaching Iceland, according to Kevin Smith, an archaeologist and chief curator at the Hafenrefer Museum of Anthropology, Brown University. He has reported on the discovery of a microblade core similar to ones manufactured in the region from northwestern Canada to the Imagpic region between circa 10,700 and 8,000 before the present. But this core was found in Iceland at a 10th century Norse site in good stratigraphic order, suggesting that the core was found or disturbed during the 10th century and carried to the site. The site was in proximity to the circa 9,000 before the present coastline in western Iceland. Significantly, the microblade was manufactured from jasper, which only matches well geochemically with western Icelandic jasper. Smith states, I'm left with the unavoidable conclusions that 1. The core was made in Iceland by someone who knew how to make and use this typically Arctic technology. 2. There is no evidence anywhere that 10th century Norse knew of use or used this technology. All right, so it wasn't the Norse who brought it. 3. That there is yet no evidence for additional related material at the site. Another possibility, although remote, is that some Greenlanders of the pre-Dorset Independence I culture or of the Dorset culture managed to reach Iceland and were imitating microblade technology of a much earlier period. Smith notes that the pre-Dorsets and Dorsets lived in eastern Greenland, an area from which intentional or unintentional travel drift to Iceland would have been relatively easy, given the short distances involved and the presence of East Greenland. Current, which runs from the northeast coast of Greenland and then splits around Iceland, regularly depositing icebergs, driftwood, and the occasional polar bear on Iceland. In any case, it seems clear that some Americans reached Iceland perhaps as early as 9,000 before the present, but possibly a few thousand years later. It is interesting that far to the west, high ocean levels continued in the Aleutian Island region from about 8,000 to 3,000 before the present. And if this is also true for the North Atlantic, then the shoreline could be of varying age. Nonetheless, one would seem to have evidence for navigation by the 10,000 to 9,000 before the present period. Hundreds of dugout canoes have been found at the bottoms of lake beds in Florida. The oldest seems to be 6,000 years old, or 6,000, sorry, 6,000 years old, while others have been found that are between 3 and 5,000 years old. The canoes are up to 22 feet long, and many have rounded sterns and bows. On the northeast coast of America, one finds coastal cultures with maritime adaptation advancing northward over or after 9,000 before the present and reaching northern Labrador by 4,500 before or earlier. So I'm not mistaken. I think recently, in the last couple of years, they found a really old canoe. I'm talking about really thousands of years before all this, before the dates he's given here, guys. So again, he wrote, this is an older book, all right? Newfoundland was settled by 5,000 before the present, between 4,900 and 3,600 years ago, while the important El Anse Amor Mound site in Labrador yielded a child's burial with charcoal dated at 7,530 before the present. This latter site has a very strong marine adaptation with a probable antler pestle for applying or grinding the paint and a quantity of red ochre found under the body. A walrus tusk suggests sea mammal hunting, and a true Toglin harpoon and a crescentic hand-held toggle leave no doubt that sea mammal hunting techniques were very sophisticated. By 7,500 years ago, the Toglin harpoon just might be the oldest such weapon found anywhere in the world. This red paint maritime tradition of coastal Labrador seems to have been a continuous one from about 9,000 to 3,000 before the present, with gradual stylistic changes. It is suspected of being ancestral to Algonquin-speaking nations of more recent times and more southern locations. It will be reviewed again in more detail below, all right? The red paint people, we got a video on that documentary we've shown, possibly coming out of ancient America or related to ancient navigators in America. Across the North Atlantic, types of boats seem to have appeared by about 9,000 before the present, when they were needed probably to take the first settlers to Ireland. The first settlers to Ireland from America. And early specimens are dated at 9,500 before the present, Star Car in Britain, a paddle, and 8,000 before the present, Holland, a dugout boat. Britain was still connected directly to the continent until 8,000 before the present, but Ireland apparently was separated from Britain by a channel, and then by the Irish Sea, during the last glaciation and afterwards. During the height of the last glaciation, up to 13,000 before the present, it is suspected that the Gulf Stream shifted southward from the Cape Hatteras Gate of North America to head straight across towards Spain instead of heading towards Britain. The stream ran from 2 to 4 degrees centigrade, cooler than at present, but its system carried tropical species farther east than it does today. Nonetheless, it would appear that southern Ireland, below the Shannon and Leinster, and coastal Glamorgan in Wales, the Severn Estuary, and southern England were all ice-free, thus indicating that the stream approached the southern coast of Ireland and Britain, making perhaps a sharp curve between Brittany and England before heading south, since the English Channel did not then exist, as noted. I would suppose that during interglacial periods, the Gulf Stream and North Atlantic Drift resumed their movement in a northeasterly direction, passing the west coast of Ireland and Scotland, passing Iceland and the Faroes, and along the west coast of Norway, towards Murmansk. I would have thought that the warmer water helped to slow down the freezing of the North Atlantic and perhaps even led to partial open water even at the height of the glaciation periods. But in any case, it would appear that no people were living in Ireland, Iceland, or the Faroes before 13,000 before the present to welcome visitors. All right, this is what he's saying. Britain did, however, have small populations during the warm periods, but more than likely, any Americans reaching Europe during the interglacial or glacial times would have arrived in France or Iberia, or perhaps farther south in the Canary Islands. If any did reach Britain during the interglacial periods, their numbers would have simply blended in with the British inhabitants. All right, this is matching with the book we're reading, Ancient and Modern Britons, who's the so-called pigs, these gypsies, so-called gypsies coming out of Egypt, the true Egypt, America. All right, so they would have blended in with the British inhabitants, and all would have retreated to southern England and Wales during the last glacial advance. Interestingly, the Romans found a somewhat darker skinned, listen, the Romans They found a what? Darker skinned, dark haired people, the Silurians, living in the section of Wales that was probably non-glaciated between 18,000 and 13,000 before the present. So what do you mean Romans? Romans didn't exist that long ago. What do you mean by Romans? But of course, they could have arrived much later and been related to similar peoples found in the Mediterranean region. As regards Native Americans reaching Iberia before recorded history, it is interesting to note that two probable Amazonian, Brazilian, groundstone hand axes have been found in Galicia. One was found on the beach of La Paman, San Martino de Biu, Pontevedra, at the edge of the sand. The other was located at Hayo in a nearby area, Cangas, at Pontevedra, also near the Atlantic coast. After careful examination, Ramon Fabregas Valcarce is of the opinion that they are definitely not Iberian and not Oriental, and that they very closely resemble examples of Brazilian hand axes found along the length of the Amazon. How they reached Pontevedra is not known. It is possible that a modern collector brought them to Spain, but then why would they show up along the coast, one of them broken apparently because of long exposure to the elements? As we shall see, this section of Galicia or nearby Portugal was visited by an American navigator during the Middle Ages of Europe. Listen, in any case, one would expect to find scattered American-made objects in many places in coastal or inland Europe out of archaeological context. Most would probably never be recognized as being American, except by knowledgeable archaeologists familiar with American artifacts. Reported Inuit harpoon heads found in Scotland and Ireland, and dating apparently from pre 1492 times, provide other examples of American objects found along coastal beaches or other coastal sites. All right. As noted in Chapter 2, the Gulf Stream has left great evidence of its actions in terms of carrying logs, flotsam, seeds, and other debris from the Caribbean and North American waters to the coast of Ireland, Wales, Scotland, the Hebrides, especially Iceland, Norway, and the Faroes. Presumably, during the last glaciation, this flotsam was carried in greater quantity to France, Iberia, and as a later to the Azores and Canary Islands. In Chapter 2, I cited a great deal of evidence relating to the frequent arrival of this material in Europe, with evidence from charcoal dated about 2000 before the present to show the continuity of this American export. All right, you guys hearing? In all likelihood, we can reasonably suppose that conservatively, at least one every century, a major storm carried Americans out into the Atlantic from, say, 9000 before the present onward. That would equate to 90 involuntary voyages before 100 before the present. At one voyage per each half century, we would be looking at 180 such trips. After about 50 BC, we can definitely document a few of the voyages, which we shall do in the next chapter. All right? But there is no reason to suppose that the voyages began simply because literate Europeans were available to record them. As mentioned earlier, it is interesting that the blood types of Native Americans, O, right, O with some A, resemble extreme Western Europeans. The Irish have large and moderately long heads, and particularly in the West and North, a relatively high proportion of blood group O, a feature which is characteristic also of Scotland, Iceland, and the Basque Country, and the Western Mediterranean region. That is, its distribution is markedly peripheral in Europe, which generally has a relatively high A frequency. The Aran Islanders near Galway, who frequently gather drift from America, have relatively high frequencies of blood group A, thanks perhaps to the stationing of English troops there several centuries ago. Now, the Aran Islands, we got, real old anthropological books stating that these people were of a dark complexion, brown complexion, swarthy people, all right, the original people of these places, of these islands. Also interesting are what some persons refer to as the peculiar features of Irish Gaelic that are said to have analogies in non-Indo-European languages such as Basque, North African, Berber, and other languages. The majority of Irish ancestry is undoubtedly pre-Celtic, or at least pre-Gaelic, being derived from the Furballs, Bagman. Is it really just from them? That's the hijack. And other ancient peoples. Okay, other ancient peoples, not just the Furballs. Did Native Americans contribute at all to the ancient settlement of Ireland and Scotland? Yes, we definitely believe so. And, the research is literally kind of showing that now. During the post-glacial era, after 13,000 before the present, some scholars believe that Americans from South America and perhaps Mesoamerica moved north, occupying formerly tundra and taiga regions as they became more temperate. Listen, these Americans would doubtless have been able to penetrate much of North America long before the populations of the Imaqpik region could have headed south. And indeed, if Proto-Eskimos, Aleut people, were the primary Imaqpik population, perhaps including Chukchi and other future Siberians, their cultural adjustment to cold regions might well have precluded much of a southern movement. Indeed, the linguist Johanna Nichols believes that all American languages except Eskimo Aleut evolved south of the ice during the period of 40,000 to 13,000 before the present. There is interesting genetic evidence to support the migration from South America, namely the dispersal of the Diego antigen discussed briefly earlier, a marker concentrated in Colombia, Venezuela, and Brazil among some Caribbean, Carib, Arawak, and other indigenous languages groups, all right? And that matches with my videos on the philology, of Americans, ancient Americans matching other nations in the world. This is what he's talking about. We've done the research on that. There, the percentages of Native Americans in South America possessing the antigen is often 20 to 30% or higher. Significantly, both the Carib and Arawak families are suspected of having originated farther south, perhaps in Amazonia. We can therefore postulate a northward migration of the marker among several language groups, eventually crossing the Caribbean and the Isthmus of Panama to Mexico and the southeastern United States, and then to Canadian border regions. Wow, look at that. What is especially interesting about the Diego antigen is not merely that it probably traces South American ancestry in North America, listen, but that it has also spread beyond America. For example, as noted earlier, persons of Irish, Polish, Japanese, and other ancestries have shown up with the Diego antigen. An Irish woman with the marker was living in Brisbane, Australia, but unfortunately, we cannot trace her ancestry to a specific place in Ireland. Some scholars have attempted to see in the Diego antigen a marker developed in Asia or Siberia that was carried into America, but this is obviously a difficult thesis given the circum-Caribbean, Amazonian, Andean character of the antigen and the documented movements of Americans across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, all right? That has an American origin, the Diego antigen. Did you guys ever know about that? It is certainly possible to suggest that maritime navigation skills could have emerged or advanced during the period before 13,000 before the present, since the waters along the Caribbean coast, with several islands visible from shore or nearby, such as Tobago, Aruba, Curaçao, and others, would have encouraged water travel. Trinidad became separated from the mainland as ocean levels increased. My own belief is that the ocean navigation is encouraged by the presence of offshore islands, and conversely, that it is unlikely to develop early where islands do not exist. Contact between North and Meso and South America during the period of 5,000 before the present and also needs to be cited as evidence of maritime activity of a more than casual kind. As an example, the construction of monumental structures of a mound or pyramid type commenced almost simultaneously in Louisiana, Mexico, Guatemala, and the coastal regions of Ecuador and Peru between 5,000 and 3,000 before the present. The architectural accomplishments argue for a high degree of social development and, at the same time, a ready and steady means of communication. It is certainly reasonable to assume that the large boats seen by Columbus in the 1490s were already in use in the Caribbean by 5,000 before the present, and that boats or sailing rafts of the kind later used along the Pacific coast between Mexico and the Andean coast were also in use. The migration of the Tarascan Purepecha people, apparently from the Andean region to western Mexico, seems to have been the end result of a long period of communication. Deleje tells us that South American civilizations were far older and more sophisticated than we once imagined. New excavations in Peru and Ecuador have turned up large pyramids and other monuments dating back nearly 5,500 years to about the time when the Great Pyramids were being constructed in Egypt. Americans of that period were not only in communication over a vast area, largely by sea, but they apparently possessed the social systems capable of sustained trade and exploration, right? Come on. And this is according to the carbon dating that they're dating that, you know. In 1987, Bullfrog Films released The Mystery of the Lost Red Paint People, directed by T.W. Timbrek with W.N. Gutzman. And I think that's the documentary I showed on my channel. A survey of the red paint, red ochre people of the region from Maine to Labrador, otherwise known as the Maritime Archaic Culture. Yes, I think this is the one I got on my channel, guys. If you haven't checked it out, it's a really good one. This remarkable American tradition lasted from about 8,000 before the present to some 3,500 before the present, as noted earlier. Some believe that it was the most advanced Native American culture ever to have inhabited the Northwest Atlantic zone. The red paint people developed one of the world's great maritime adapted cultures. Talking about seafarers, talking about so-called Phoenicians, featuring elaborate artistic items and a deep-sea fishing and hunting orientation. The red paint people utilized both barbed and togline harpoons, including one of the latter dated at 7,500 before the present, as well as killer whale effigies. Come on, who's the real whale hunters? Water bird drawings, a great auk beak, suggesting that they may have followed the auk's migration, well organized communities, stone pinnacles placed along the coast, and numerous steamed points, plummets, and engraved pendants. Locations selected were often near the sea, at very dramatic and prominent locations, as in Labrador at Ballybrack. Pinwreck and Goatsman present evidence suggesting that the red paint people contacted Europe, leaving influences in places such as Brittany, Denmark, Norway, and elsewhere. The use of red ochre in graves is cited as an example, along with tools of slate, spiritual beliefs, art forms, and designs. The site, the work of Guthorm Jessing, who saw evidence of an ancient circumpolar culture linking America and Europe and East Siberia, but not Central Russia. Justin has commented that with great certainty, we can construct a continuous culture belt in the Arctic and subarctic regions. For the present, this cultural connection can be established most securely in the subarctic and boreal frost regions, but important cultural manifestations such as the use of slate, the skin boat, and the Eskimo harpoon suggest that the connection in the Arctic Sea hunting cultures is also very old. Strangely enough, it looks as if the British Isles had also been touched by the circumpolar Stone Age culture. He goes on to say that on the whole, there would seem to be so many Arctic elements in early British culture that it is very desirable that the problem should be taken up for investigation. Like Werner Mueller, Jessing wanted to explore whether there is a connection between the West European Paleolithic culture and the Eskimo cultures. He knows that J. Pokorny has argued on philological evidence that the Arctic harpoon with line and bladder was present in Ireland in pre-Celtic times. The Eskimo harpoon with an open socket had spread to the Kola Peninsula of Scandinavia in the Bronze Age, according to Jussing, and by 1335 AD, the Basques were using a harpoon with a line and float instead of a bladder. Whether the harpoon of that type was an Inuit invention or whether it is older in red paint cultures of northeastern America, yeah, I would say that, remains to be seen. As noted, a true Oglen harpoon was found in Labrador dated at 7,500 before the present, and the possibility exists that it just might be the oldest such weapon found anywhere in the world. All right, oldest weapon anywhere in the world. Come on now. In any event, it would appear that the harpoon used for Arctic style hunting is an American invention. All right, American invention that spread to Asia and Europe from America. Come on, clearly by human contact. Another world's oldest, guys. Hmm. Stuart Piggott tells us that in the Orkney Islands, north of Scotland, as at Skarabrae, there are sites reflecting circumpolar culture of the kind still surviving among Eskimos and allied peoples dated late in the third millennium BC, 4500 to 4000 before the present. The use of red ochre and burial mounds and burials seem to extend south to Virginia, about 11,000 before the present or earlier. Come on, man. Virginia, 11,000 years ago, but especially characteristic farther north. In southern Labrador, red paint burial mounds are dated to 7,500 before the present and 6,900 before the present, associated with maritime oriented cultures. Farther south, it extended back to 8,000 before the present or earlier and persisted in some areas to 3,500 to 3,000 before the present. When climatic change, a cooling trend, seems to have led to a decline in open water hunting and the harpooning of swordfish, especially in the Gulf of Maine area. The burial mound culture of 7,500 before the present represents an advanced development. Older sites may have been destroyed by rising sea levels after 8,500 before the present. That the red paint people were excellent sailors is illustrated by their pursuit of the very large and difficult swordfish as prey. Not only were swordfish caught off of Maine after 5,100 before the present, but swords were made from them. Heavy woodworking tools and graves for boat making and related items all argued for the conclusion that relatively large dugout canoes were being used for fishing, marine hunting, and transportation. Effigies of whales in Massachusetts and of seals and porpoises in Maine also illustrate the maritime orientation. During the red paint era, there is some evidence that the Gulf Stream may have gone further north along the northeast coast of America before turning eastward toward Ireland and Britain. If this is true, then voyagers from the northeast of America might well have been brought from there more directly, listen, to northern Scotland, the Orkneys, Shetland, and Iceland during the period before about 3,500 before the present. This would help to explain the alleged red paint influence in Britain and the microblade found in Iceland after 3,500 before the present. A cooling trend seems to have begun in North Atlantic, with a shift away from marine hunting in the Gulf of Maine. Farther north, the Dorset culture replaced the archaic maritime red paint tradition during the 2000s BC, perhaps an example of the Dorset adaptation to colder ice hunting conditions. Although there is a shift to use of a birch bark canoes for river and lake use, dugout boats continue to be made in New England into the 17th century of our own era. The arrival of Americans in European waters might be expected to lead to a series of tales and legends about islands of mystery. This is what we've been saying beyond the western horizon. I told you all these mythical lands is America. Indeed, we know that such is the case, not only in the writings of ancient Hellenes or the ancient Greeks, but in the belief in sea paradises. Come on, man. I've been trying to tell you guys all these mythical lands, these paradises in the Atlantic. They've always been talking about the Americas. How many more books how much more research we're gonna be doing till you guys get it? Located to the west of Ireland, believes in Elysium, right? The Elysium is the Americas in the Western Ocean, could in fact be based upon vague traditions about strangers arriving from the West. It may be that the reputed voyage of Saint Brendan from Ireland in the 5th century CE, right, AD, written about in the 9th century, was inspired by an American visit, all right, or the tradition of one. Such an inspiration might be needed to cause a navigator to sail out of sight of land against the winds and currents, thusing all the tales of mysterious islands to the west, common to several parts of Europe. May we not see a pale reflection of American voyages and perhaps of the stories told by Americans upon discovering Europe? Buddy back for the illusion. Yeah, the true old world, yo. Shout out to Drop, yo. Man, wow. How much more corroboration, you know, how many more different people saying the same thing, showing you, the logical research out there in history when it comes to navigation, in these areas of the world. We went from here to that part of the world, guys. Once you start seeing all the research, once you know about, corn and maize and how it went over there to Wales and they were calling it Welsh corn or Welsh turkeys and all that, it's just, undisputable. It's undebatable. what we are learning, guys, what we are proving. America is the true old world. People were going out from here into Europe, into Asia, into Africa, to the Iberian Peninsula. Man. So this is the end of this chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I did enjoy reading it. It was pretty long, but I enjoyed reading it because it matches everything we've been learning. We're reading different books, but they're all kind of saying the same thing, right? And probably tomorrow, if not the next day, I'm going to read another chapter of History of America before Columbus. You're going to see how it matches this chapter exactly. And that's a book from the 1800s. You guys are going to see. Remember that when I say that when I'm reading it tomorrow, remember what I said and what we read today. All right. And, once again, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me read. I hope it wasn't boring. I thought it was pretty interesting information. I thought it mentioned a lot of things we've already researched. Jack Ford does a pretty good job apart from his hijacks. He does have an open mind, he says, in his time when he wrote this book. But, in 2024, it's beyond doubt, it was an American origin to things, right? To a lot of things, a lot of people going out, civilizing other parts of the world, influencing other parts of the world. And I hope you guys see that again. And this book was clearly stating that. Again, that was the book, The American Discovery of Europe by Jack D. Forbes. We were just reading chapter 4. Appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to me all the way to the end. Shout out to anybody who was here in the live premiere. Shout out to you if you came later and watched it later. I appreciate everybody who sits down and watches these videos and understands why I'm doing this. I'm trying to create a lot of content. First, I want to get this info out, these chapters out fully so people can have the information in case they don't have access to these books. And then I got a plan. I got a plan for the future. And, possibly next year, we're going to put a lot of these books together, different parts, different segments, and you're going to see how it all kind of correlates and goes together. Just like I used to do in my older videos, showing you a lot of different sources. All right. Because I used to just grab a little thing from here and there from one book and then grab another little sentence from another book. But I wanted to start reading full chapters to you guys. So there's no room for doubt or you guys saying I'm skipping things, because a lot of people were saying I was skipping things. You're not reading the full chapter, well, now you guys see, all right? Literally, American discovery of Europe, literally, all right? Thanks for sticking around. Shout out to all my Patreon supporters, anybody who's been following me for years, supporting me, giving me the good comments, motivating me to continue. I appreciate you guys. You guys are holding me up. Shout out to all my new channel members. All right. Again, we'll have a lot of private moments. I got a lot of private moments planned for my members, these personal blogs that are too private for the trolls you know, and I guess I can upload them to Patreon eventually. But I appreciate you anyways for just wanting to support that way, and I want to go ahead and do that for at least the channel members because they're going out their way. And my patrons, I got so much content there too. I got the Chase Art series. I got a lot of books. I'm gonna eventually scan this book and upload it to my Patreon. In case you don't have access to it or can't afford it or whatever, you know. I'll eventually do that. I got plans for all these books that I got to scan them and put them on Patreon as well. All right. That was a lot of drop. Now you heard it here. Homo sapiens, typical Homo sapiens came out of the Americas. We were the ancient navigators, the red paint people, all that. All that we read today and plus and much more. Okay. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa.